Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, JudgeSpektre here. Now, before I begin with this Way of the Samurai Buried Treasures video, I need to make a slight correction. At the end of my last Buried Treasures video, The Thing, I stated that Way of the Samurai would be my last Buried Treasures, and that's not entirely true. It will be the last one in terms of what I have on my list currently, but I will be adding new games to the list as I become aware of them, so Buried Treasures isn't going anywhere. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about Way of the Samurai. Released in 2002, it's somewhat of a choose-your-own-adventure kind of a game, really, as there are many different possible outcomes to the storyline depending upon choices you make throughout the game. You play a Ronin who wanders into town and finds himself in the middle of a battle between rival samurai clans, as well as the government and, unfortunately, the normal people who happen to be also be caught in the middle of this conflict. Now, as I said, the game does vary significantly depending on the choices you make, and the game has up to 6 different endings, I think. And it's interesting to see how the thing plays out differently, you know, when you side with one group over the other. But the main thing with Way of the Samurai is the combat. The combat in this game is very interesting in the way they handle it. It's not just hack and slash. There's a bit of strategy and defense employed in the way you fight, as just blindly attacking them with your swords on the higher difficulties usually isn't going to get you anything except death. When you're fighting, you'll be using defensive strategies like pulling or pushing your opponents off balance, exposing them to your attacks, and if you're not careful with how you do it, you could very well be the one who is pulled off balance, as there's sort of a feature in that where if you pull one direction and they push the other, it's just a tug of war to see who will actually make the decision and who will actually get pushed or pulled off balance. It's pretty interesting, and I think it works kind of well. Now, as far as the weapons that you actually use in the game, they're samurai swords, and there's about 40 of them, and they each have their own sets of moves like regular, heavy attacks, kicks, and a lot of different variations depending on which one you're using. And they also have various different styles, such as side, up, in the middle, crouching down. There's a lot of stuff to choose from, and by facing enemies and defeating them on the higher difficulties, you may find scrolls which unlock even more moves that you may not be able to unlock simply by just using the sword, which is how you unlock some moves. Also, one thing I need to mention about the actual storyline of the game, as I said, it changes based on what you do, but there's one thing that was interesting, and that is there is no voiceovers, not even in Japanese. Instead, you'll actually hear like grunts and groans to sort of signify what emotion that character is supposed to be feeling while you're reading their text, like or ah or whatever. It sounds kind of funny at first, but it actually works, and it works pretty well. And come to think of it, in the sequel to this game, Way of the Samurai 2, I was actually found myself wishing that they would have used this in that game, as they actually had full voiceovers in that game, and they were horrendous to say the least, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Now, back on topic with Way of the Samurai Part 1. The soundtrack in Way of the Samurai was also quite good, as it sort of, had that Tenchu kind of feel to it, and that's cool. And everything I've said with the gameplay, the unique storyline, and soundtrack, and everything just seems to work pretty well. So this is overall a very good game, and sadly overlooked by most people, and it's also quite rare to find this. As I purchased my copy from GameStop, they actually mentioned that they hadn't seen a copy of this game in a couple of years up there, and I was lucky that I found it. And the second one's hardly any less rare, as I paid about $30 for my copy off eBay. So you may or may not be able to find this game too easy, but if you can, I'd say pick it up because it's pretty darn good. Now, I think I've said pretty much everything I have to say about this one, and I may actually do a follow-up video on Way of the Samurai 2. I'm not exactly sure yet, but that is a possibility for the future. But for now, thank everybody for watching this. Now, be gone.